So long as landlords are considered to be businesses, they are required to follow the laws. Just like a restaurant will ask you to be masked and vaccinated, right? However, landlords have a tougher job at it because landlords are not transient businesses. People who come in there, live there, they have a long-term relationship with the landlord. So the landlord is not as a restaurant or a hair salon that you come in and go. You live there. You know the landlord for years. You meant to remain there for years. So landlords have a tough go at it because they have to, their main reason is to make a profit, right? And they also can't really tell if you're vaccinated or not, or if you're right, they can't really enforce it. So can the landlord force you to wear a mask and take a vaccine? The answer is maybe. The bottom line is, how would a landlord really enforce that?
It is my pleasure to welcome Altagracia Pierre Outerbridge to the show. She is an attorney based in New York, and she specializes in landlord-tenant law. What got me interested in having her on the show today is that she sent an email about an interesting topic that I think we're all going to have to deal with as landlords and maybe as tenants as well. And that is what we've been talking about around the world and certainly in the country. The entire human race is talking about this stuff right now. And that is vaccine mandates and mask mandates, but specifically as they relate to landlords and tenants. Have you thought much about that? We've thought about, if you go into an airport, they can require you to wear a mask. If you want a job anymore, maybe they're requiring you to have a vaccine, and that's being litigated, obviously, at some of the highest courts in the land, and it'll continue to be so. But I wanted to have Altagracia just talk a little bit about how this stuff, if at all, is relating to landlords and tenants. Tell us about it.
Thank you for having me. Landlords are some of the largest businesses we know, right? Much unlike a restaurant, a lot of landlords are very large. It's a big business, right? We know in some cities they have a lot of rentals, right? Especially urban cities. So it's big business. In terms of mask wearing and vaccines,
everybody's talking about this, but they're not really talking about it much as it relates to landlords and tenants. So it's a good topic.
Right. So long as landlords are considered to be businesses, they are required to follow the laws. Just like a restaurant will ask you to be masked and vaccinated, right? However, landlords have a tougher job at it because landlords are not transient businesses. People who come in there, live there, they have a long-term relationship with the landlord. So the landlord is not as a restaurant or a hair salon that you come in and go. You live there. You know the landlord for years. You meant to remain there for years. So landlords have a tough go at it because they have to, their main reason is to make a profit, right? And they also can't really tell if you're vaccinated or not, or if you're right, they can't really enforce it. So can the landlord force you to wear a mask and take a vaccine? The answer is maybe. The bottom line is, how would a landlord really enforce that? How would you know if somebody's vaccinated, right? How would you go after somebody who is unmasked 1 or 2 times? How do you calibrate the violations, quote unquote, of the lease? It would probably be considered a violation of the lease if you were unmasked, right, in a common area, if there were a sign. So what landlords are doing, including my own, is to put a sign saying, on our system, if you're not vaccinated, wear a mask. If you are, we trust you. No real way to find out, or no real way to really, the landlord's not going to look at their camera 24/7 to see who's masked or unmasked. So in the end, it's not enforceable, probably won't really ever be. The only time I've seen a landlord really enforce it in a few cases of ours is that the landlord's going after the big violators, the folks who are having parties, right? The folks who are having large gatherings with no mask. Those are really the folks that the landlords are going after. The regular, Jane or Susan who doesn't have a mask, not really gonna, make the landlord do much. Landlords really are responding to tenant concerns. If tenants are not raising a concern, the landlord doesn't really go after it.
Right. So, this would obviously be more of an issue in an apartment complex versus a single family home, right?
Correct.
Okay. I mean, do you think we'll get to the point where the government is saying, or certain landlords are saying, that you can't live in my house or apartment complex unless you're vaccinated?
There is a landlord in Florida that's actually doing that. He is actually saying that I won't rent you an apartment as a new tenant. The best way to keep a tenant from coming in is before they actually take possession, right? So this landlord is actually asking in his applications, are you vaccinated? And
Wow.
correct.
It is. So I'm curious. I mean, you probably don't know the answer because it hasn't been litigated yet, but is that a legal question?
I would say that it is. I would say that it is. If you voluntarily answer it, then you voluntarily answered it.
I
I don't
know,
know
but
that.
you can't ask what race or religion or familial status someone is, right?
Correct, but that's not, I don't know that vaccination status is a protected category,
Yeah,
right there.
that's yeah, it's got to be litigated. So what are some of the issues that, this will obviously end up with the Supreme Court, I'm sure, because it's just such a major issue. What are some of the things that the Supreme Court would consider on that? I mean, what's interesting about the medical stuff is that you have the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? And I just don't know how they're going to weigh this kind of stuff out. It could come in either direction, I would think. But what are some of the what's some of the thinking? Just help us, and I'll just give you a little more fodder for this. Maybe I mean, part of the fair housing laws is if something is an immutable characteristic, right? It's not fair to discriminate against someone for something that is not their choice, right? It's immutable. But, this is a choice, right? It's a choice if you want to get vaccinated or not. But, part of it is you might think you'll get sick or be harmed. So can the law require putting you into harm's way? And then what if you have another issue like a religious exemption? Or, so, I don't know. It's a complicated thing, right?
So, I mean, landlords don't want to deal with that, right? A claim of discrimination. So you would make a reasonable accommodation claim and say, I'm seeking a reasonable accommodation, right? And that's very much. So I think that the ADA and the disability law is a little bit different than asking someone, are you vaccinated, right? Because you're looking at the exception, and the exception, you can always assert your exception. No, I am not. And the reason I'm not is because I have this other issue and I can't be, right? So a landlord would be foolish after having this information to deny you. Even if you have other issues why they should deny you, you probably are a shoo-in at that point because you now have stated a claim of discrimination, right? That they probably would just let you in, even if you had, let's say, bad credit or other issues, right? Because now you've put on paper that you have a claim, right? So folks are very much able to assert their exception in their disability or their religious claim as to why they are not. I mean, the question still remains: are you vaccinated? And if you're not, then you state a claim as to why you're protected under the law.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's on an application, but what if you have a landlord who, for example, is very paranoid about COVID? And they just are worried that if they accept a vaccinated person or an unvaccinated person into their apartment building, maybe the other tenants could sue them, or maybe they live there and they're concerned about it. Now, there's a whole debate that the biggest spread is from actually vaccinated people, which is an interesting discussion, but we won't even go down that rabbit hole because we're just looking at the legal part of it. But, what about that? Like, it really puts a landlord in a very difficult situation.
So I don't see anyone winning a case or prevailing on a case where you say the landlord's negligence caused me to get COVID. I mean, you would have to prove causation, which is a big part of personal injury claims, right? That you didn't get it from your neighbor, well, your best friend over the weekend, right? Your godmother
Yeah,
or someone
right.
else. So I'm sure there's an attorney out there that would take it, right? But I don't see how you would prove causation that you got it from the elevator in the landlord's building.
Yeah.
In terms of what you can do, what some tenants have done and can do is start withholding rent, right? I would say that living in a place that doesn't follow the law is as bad as living with no hot water, right? It's a condition just like any other condition, right? To put pressure on the landlord. you probably can sue the landlord in court for them to enforce these rules, just as if you could sue for lack of heat, right? So that's really where I see the compensation lying in terms of you're getting a lower rent because of these issues in your building, right? It's as if the hallway wasn't swept, right? It's the same thing.
You're
But
making me very happy that I really focus on single family homes and not apartment buildings right now, because I see this as a big potential challenge for apartment owners.
I agree with you. I haven't seen a lot of tenants challenge it. And when it's challenged, folks don't challenge their neighbor per se, right? They challenge the big violators. So I've had clients who say, I will never wear a mask, right? And I also have large gatherings. That's a problem, right? But folks don't usually complain on their next door neighbor they see in the elevator. That becomes a private dispute. Put on
Yeah.
your mask. Don't put, I won't. And then it's like, it's bad and then it's over, right? But I don't see a lot of tenants so far having challenged in that way, right? They usually are challenging, my neighbor has a lot of friends and they're always here kind of thing. But folks usually have an understanding that they can, I think, knock on the neighbor's door and say, hey, what's going on? So I haven't seen it in a big way in that way. And I don't know that it'll happen in that way.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will. I just don't see.
One of the real concerns I have here is that, we're moving to this society that's like this medical apartheid. It's like a witch hunt for people. And if someone wears a mask, they're saying to the world, I don't have a vaccine. It's like being marked with a scarlet letter, right? So either way, there's just no winning answer for this, is there?
Sure that it's marking yourself with a scarlet letter. I think folks, I see elderly people wear it because they're afraid of what someone else will do, right? Other people who are not masked. I think it could send two messages. The first message is I'm not vaxxed, but the next message could be that I don't know if you're vaxxed, so I'll protect myself, which is all I can do. So I've actually never seen it that way. When I see someone masked, I believe they think they're protecting themselves regardless of your status. But I see the other perspective.
Yeah, interesting. What else do you want people, especially landlords? I mean, certainly we have some tenants listening to the show, but it's mostly for real estate investors. What else do you want people to know about masks and vaccines and just in general, the way the whole climate has changed? And also, to add on to that, feel free to talk about the eviction moratoriums that are over, I guess. I mean, maybe they're localized in certain places, but, feel free to just talk about any of that.
Well, I would, as we represent large landlords just as well, I would tell landlords to put mask requirements prominently everywhere. That at least covers you in terms of the elevator, the common areas, the laundry room, right? At least you'll say, hey, I've put what can I do? It's a bit of a defense, at least factually, that you can say if you were to be sued by a tenant that I have notices everywhere. What can I really do other than put notices? So what landlords have been doing is to do that, and I think that may be sufficient unless you're pushed by a tenant, right, to do otherwise. In terms of the moratorium across the states, I know New Jersey is through January 20, end of January. New York is through mid-January. There are some states to end of December. I anticipate it's going to be renewed or extended. There are various bills in Congress to extend it. I think it may be seen right now as duplicative if they extend what's already working. I think we'll see mid-January that extensions will probably occur. Either they will occur on a mass scale or just target certain group of people who are lower income or otherwise, but I do believe it's going to be extended. I don't believe politically that they will, right after the new year, stop the eviction moratorium. So I tell landlords to go for the long run and expect that we'll be out for another year. In terms of moving cases forward, if you have to move cases forward of tenants not paying you, one way is to seek the emergency rental assistance. There's about 47 billion of it out there. I think only a few tenants have been, less than 20% has been distributed. So landlords need to advocate for themselves to get that money. It's a lot of money and it's not being distributed efficiently. The second thing I would say is some landlords have been smart to get the tenants to apply, right? the best ways for your tenant to apply. I've heard landlords do workshops where they help the tenants apply, right? So like a mass
for the
workshop.
rental assistance you're talking about.
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
Correct, right? Coffee, tea, donuts. Let's all apply for rental assistance here, right? And it's work.
It's
right?
ridiculous that a landlord should have to do that, but it's better than not getting the rent. So.
Correct. If your tenant is not applying, I think they're after certain warnings and asking the tenant to apply. Make sure you do it in writing. Most leases ask you to send notices by certain mail. So email is good. I'm guessing, but you can ask the tenant to apply at some point, right? Then you can apply on your own when you can prove the tenant has refused to apply. Yeah. Some states will allow you to apply even after the tenant has vacated, right? So be mindful of that. Some states will say if you take the money, you can't evict. So be mindful of what your state is saying in terms of the other side of accepting that money. Because for some states, right, once you accept that money, you can no longer evict for a certain period of time. I would also say a lot of landlords are chipping at the moratorium, knowing that it may last longer than January. They're going to court, right? At least in some states, tenants are submitting hardship affidavits. Those affidavits can be challenged. And sometimes all you need to do is actually challenge it to get the tenant to back down. At the beginning, landlords were taking the hardship affidavits to be the end or be all. Mm-hmm. Now, as landlords are pushing through and saying this fact pattern does not fall under a hardship. I do see you buying furniture. I see you with taking Ubers all the time. I don't think you suffered a hardship. Right. At which point they're pushing their tenants to show their credit card statement, their whole financial life, and that's uncomfortable. So some tenants will just vacate.
Yeah.
Or pay
Interesting.
you.
Yeah. Okay. So the landlord can fight back then. That's good. That's good to hear. So if your tenant is submitting a hardship letter and they bought a nice new car, the nice thing about being a landlord is you're probably going to know a lot of this stuff because you're maybe there, or you can visit your property or talk to your property managers, or, maybe you have cameras. Now, mostly we're talking about apartment complexes here when we're having this discussion, and a lot of our investors are single family home investors. But, I got to go back to something that you said earlier and just ask you what it's like in New York City now, because I live in Florida. And when I talk to my friends in New York City or in LA, for example, or San Francisco, it's just a very different life than we have in Florida. Because here, you wouldn't even know COVID is a thing unless you went to the airport, right? Or a doctor's office. That's where you're wearing a mask, and that's where people are concerned about it. But in normal life, it's just pretty much life as usual here.
Absolutely. New York is very much the mask state. If you're not wearing a mask, you're probably getting the sideways look, right? So we are policing each other. You can tell somebody's political affiliation maybe by seeing whether they're wearing a mask or not. But
I know, which is another scarlet letter. I don't like that.
Right?
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. That concerns me. Yeah, that really does concern me about that. But yeah, it's really interesting. So just wrap it up with any comments you have about, anything, maybe questions I didn't ask you or whatever you want people to know.
I would want landlords to know, whether they're in a multifamily or 2 or 3 units, right? That if the tenant has not paid you, use soft pressure and try to negotiate. The courthouse is very long. Courthouses are backlogged across the country. Yeah. By the time you get before a judge for a real hearing, it'll be a while, an actual, trial. So try to negotiate, try to lower the rent and get what you can. Try to work with the tenant to pay by using the rental assistance spot that's out there. Otherwise, if you're really having a hard time, push through the court case. During COVID, actually push through it.
Yeah, good advice. And give out your website if you would, Altagracia.
Sure, Jason. So it's outerbridgelaw.com. Our number is 877 Outerbridge.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom with us. We appreciate it.